All right, good afternoon. You should be here for the Navigating Writing Advice webinar. We'll get started in a minute or so. Give everyone time to get here. All right, let's get started. Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. You should be here for the Navigating Writing Advice webinar. I am Dr. Johanna Broussard. Oh, we've already got something in the chat. Okay, it's the links. I am Dr. Johanna Broussard, a qualitative research mentor here at Statistics Solutions. We are a full-service dissertation assistance company providing graduate students and others with research support from topic development all the way through final defense, and in some cases, developing your project into a publishable quality article. So we can help with anything in that level. But today we are going to talk about navigating all of the writing advice you are likely to hear at some point during your dissertation process. Now, a few caveats. One, because we don't often have time in these webinars to go into the details of your individual project and situation, I will not be answering questions specific to you that are hyper-specific for your project. This will be a more generalized presentation. If you would like assistance, we can work out a consult, and we'll talk about that later on. Also, you will receive a copy of the webinar with audio and a video of the PowerPoint within 1 week. And so if you do have questions that, pertain to the advice, or maybe like, well, how do I politely tell someone I'm not going to listen to their advice? Use the Q&A feature. Because what I like to do, I like to treat it the way I treated when I taught a class. I'm giving you the material, and I'm also making a recording of it. But if you have a question, we pause once I finish a sentence. The question is then repeated orally. So I would then, in this case, read your question aloud, and then I would orally answer it. So that way, when you go back and you listen to the recording, you have material, question, answer. And that way, everything helps to reinforce everything. So we do have a few things to go over. So let's move forward. What are we going to do today? I'm going to talk about where you can find writing advice. I'm going to talk about different types of writing advice that you may seek out, that you may need, that you may be offered. We'll talk about different types of common writing advice that graduate students at master's level, even at undergraduate level, at doctoral level, well, anyone who says they're writing something, we'll talk about some common advice that people are probably going to give you, whether you ask for it or not. We're going to talk about fitting advice into your life. And then there will be some tips, some best practices, and some important reminders. So let us begin. Where are you going to find writing advice? Well, anywhere. Some common places: your university, writing courses, faculty, the university website. Your school may have a writing center, so to help you with that. So your university is likely to have a lot of resources that can give you advice and assistance. You can also find social media support groups. I'm a member of several for various types of writing. YouTube, video websites like Skillshare, and you can find it throughout the internet. If you do a simple Google search, writing advice, you'll turn up hundreds upon hundreds of websites and videos and articles offering advice on how to improve your writing and how to motivate yourself to keep writing. So you can pretty much find writing advice anywhere. And like I said, if you just go somewhere and you mention to someone casually you're working on a dissertation, there's about a 30 to 40% chance, based on my own anecdotal experience, that they're going to offer you a piece of writing advice. So you're going to be given advice throughout your time while you're working on your dissertation. That's why navigating it, understanding the meaning and the intent, and being able to critically engage with what the advice assumes about you and expects from you is essential to not getting bogged down and burnt out. I do apologize. I am getting over a cold. So let's talk about university writing advice. More often than not, you can get writing advice from your faculty in grad school, your chair, your other professors. This type of advice is provided by experts who have done what you're trying to do. Maybe you'll take a class. We had a required writing class in grad school, which was how to turn a seminar paper into an article of publishable quality in 12 weeks. So there are writing classes. Some grad students will go to a writing center if they feel they need more help. The methods and the suggestions are often backed by research data and or experience in academic writing. And because it's connected to your university, it's often really convenient to get to, which makes it accessible. It's a lot easier to get advice from people that you're going to see, or who are in the building where you're taking classes, if you're taking classes in person. But there are some drawbacks that a lot of us really don't think about. Different life situations. Are you a full-time student where the dissertation is your job? Or are you full-time working student where you have a full-time job and you're trying to go to school in addition? A lot of the advice that faculty will give you, because they were full-time students, if they had a job, it was like the job I had in graduate school as either a teaching or a research assistant. My job was to teach one class a week, and so, while I was dissertating. So I was essentially a full-time student. I was single for most of the time I was working on my dissertation. If you don't have a family, or if they didn't have a family and you have a family to take care of, your life situation may mean that their advice is not always going to be applicable. The same thing with like a writing center or a tutoring center. The hours it's available may not fit into your schedule. So the research they have may be a little bit dated. Just because they've been writing and working on and publishing doesn't mean they're up to date on the latest advice for writing, time management, etc. And the latest research, because often if you're working on getting tenure, you're focused on the research connected to the projects you're working on. And you don't have time to just read academic theory and writing for pleasure. As I mentioned with the example of a writing center, the availability of in-person assistance can be limited. Writing centers have certain office hours. Faculty have only so many hours where they're able to help individual students depending upon their workload, right? So that can be limited, and the quality of the assistance can vary. If you go to a writing center, you're largely going to get writing advice geared toward undergraduate level papers. So it may not be exactly what you need. It will be good advice, but not at the level you need it to be. Social media support groups are places people will often turn to. Why? Peer-to-peer. Because you may have heard finding a critique partner is really good advice, and it often is. And having someone who's a peer, someone who's going through the process at the same time, can help you commiserate, can help you move forward. Social media support groups are technically always available because you can get to the social media website, Facebook, the TikTok, the Instagram, all of those websites. You can get them 24/7. And there's a good chance someone can respond. Which makes them convenient. They're often free of formality. They're often free of jargon. It's people talking to each other. You can get some assistance in quote unquote normal people language. And these support groups are really good for encouragement and for emotional support. They can be really good cheerleaders. They can be great places to vent, especially if they're not connected to your university. They can be good places just to have someone to talk to. But again, there are drawbacks, and you're going to see a lot of these drawbacks come up again. Different life situations among members. So again, my situation and your situation may not be exactly the same. And now I'm going to speak as a qualitative researcher. You have to then determine how much of my advice is transferable to your situation. So keep that in mind. Writing advice may not always be specific to your genre. If you just Google writing support group, you'll get anything from creative writing, memoirs, academic writing, And so you'll get all different types. They may not, and even in academic writing, unless you're looking for something specific to your field, you may be end up talking to someone in a different field who can understand some of what you need help with and can help in some ways, but may not be able to provide the specific field, discipline, area-based support that someone who's also in your field could provide. And as such, the basis and the merit of the writing advice can vary wildly. You can get some great advice from fiction writers to help you in academic writing, but not all of the advice that they have is going to be applicable because of the different nature of fiction publishing and academic nonfiction publishing. Just as a brief example, a lot of you are probably using APA as your citation style. The standard for fiction is Chicago Manual of Style, which is somewhat similar, but just different enough to be annoying. So they can help with some things, but not with others. And social media support groups often drift into what I've taken to calling memeified writing advice. They'll pop up some writing memes like the angry old man pointing a finger, you should be writing, or have you started writing yet? Or they'll post Stephen King's writing schedule, and you'll see how Stephen King talks about how he writes 8 to 10 hours a day. Remember, Stephen King is a fiction writer, and writing big, thick, scary thriller novels is what he gets paid to do. That is his job. That and telling bad jokes on social media, apparently. But again, you're going to hear me say a lot of this when we get to the specific type of advice, but consider the source, consider the situation, consider how much you can bring over into your life. YouTube and other video sites. Look, YouTube videos are great for finding advice on anything. I've learned how to do plumbing, basic electrical work, paint miniature figurines, a lot of basic car maintenance through YouTube. And there's a lot of writing advice. A lot of writers and editors of all kinds will have advice on writing. It's accessible. There's a lot of advice in multiple languages. So there's a good chance if English isn't your first language, you'll be able to find writing advice in your language. And again, a lot of it are professional writers, fiction and nonfiction, editors, and other experts, agents, publishers, professors. But there are some drawbacks. The best advice is often kept behind a paywall. Now, YouTube is free, but there's a lot of better, more focused advice on sites like Skillshare, which ask for annual payments of a couple $100. So you've got to pay to access any content. You can see that it's there, but you can't always access it. So money becomes an issue. The quality of the videos, not of the advice, but of the videos, varies widely. I've seen a lot of Skillshare videos that had some really good advice, but they were presented in an annoying, automated, computer-generated AI voice that was just really, really hard to listen to. or it's writers who are good at writing, but they're not good at video editing. And so it can be really boring and frustrating listening to how the advice is presented. And if you've ever spent time on YouTube, you know this. It can easily lead you down a rabbit hole. You're not paying attention. All of a sudden, you're no longer in writing advice. It's people reading creepy pastas. Then it's video games. Then it's cat videos. And then you realize that you've been looking at cat videos for 4 hours. I'm really good at looking at cat videos for 4 hours. So YouTube is easy to get distracted on if you're not paying attention, because the algorithm likes what you like and it wants to show you more of what you like, so you'll stay on the website. And internet writing advice. As I've said, it's accessible. It's everywhere. And the same thing, great variety of advice in multiple languages. Professional writers, editors, faculty have websites offering writing advice. Graduate schools have websites offering writing advice, often the same writing advice you find everywhere else. But the quality of both the website and the advice can vary. Research bases can be dated or non-existent. It becomes really easy to find writing memes, but not deep, meaningful, nuanced advice. And so finding that quality advice, the advice that you need, can require some really diligent searching. And so let's move forward to looking at what types of advice you may be searching for. And I've broken it down into 5 different types of advice that you may go after, that you may need help with. Basic writing advice is the first one. That's grammar, punctuation, general structure. When I was editing academic journals, and even with my own writing for the longest time and that of my friends and colleagues, the number of people with PhDs who would write convoluted sentences to avoid using a semicolon because they were uncertain of the rules for using semicolons never ceased to amaze me. Maybe you need help with comma issues or understanding when to and when not to use passive voice. Basic writing advice is something that there's no shame in not knowing all of the nuances, because it's a lot. And if English isn't your first language, the rules of English grammar and punctuation can seem like a barrier. And so this may be the advice you need. You just may need someone to help with grammar, punctuation, when to break a paragraph, etc. Moving up, you may need rhetorical advice. How do I construct my argument in a logical, digestible, understandable format? Can someone explain why we're using this rhetorical structure? Maybe you need someone to give you some rhetorical strategies to bolster your argument. Rhetorical writing advice is different from grammar. It's more advanced, it's more nuanced. And if that's what you need to know that that is a type of advice. Maybe you're mixing your metaphors and you don't understand how to keep that consistent. That's rhetorical writing advice. Genre-specific advice. This is how to write a particular genre. A persuasive essay is a genre, a humanities dissertation, a historical romance novel. What do I need to know about this genre? The first piece of genre-specific writing advice I would suggest is see if your school has a dissertation template, because that will tell you in general what the genre of dissertation needs to have at your school. And we can get more specific, like going to your department to see if they have any department-specific templates, or looking at other dissertations from your department to see what they did. But maybe you need help with something particular to the genre, like writing up a qualitative results chapter. That is particular to the genre of a qualitative social science and or humanities dissertation. And so knowing that that's the type of advice you need can help cut down on search time, can help you determine the quality of advice offered, and can help you know who to ask. Motivation and encouragement. This is a big one. Maybe you're a good writer. I mean, you were good enough to get into grad school. So you are good enough to finish writing your dissertation. Let me repeat that. You are good enough to finish writing your dissertation. But maybe you just need motivation and encouragement. That's a different type of advice than anything that I've mentioned so far. And then generalized writing advice. Sometimes you just need someone to give you some advice like, hey, I know you don't know specifically the genre of this type of a dissertation, but does what I'm saying make sense? Just, sometimes having someone who's an intelligent person, who's not connected to your project in any way, to look over it and see if, okay, I'm with you, but I don't understand this part. What fanfic writers call a beta reader. You can have beta readers who know the field. You can just have beta readers who are willing to go, I don't know the specifics, so I can't tell you if you have enough evidence, but it makes sense. Or I don't understand what this sentence is saying. That would be generalized writing advice. And you may need one of these, you may need multiple types of these. But knowing what you need before you seek it out can be very, very helpful. So let's look at some common bits of writing advice. And to find these 5 pieces of writing advice, I did 2 things. One, I did a Google search, and the most common pieces of writing advice for the first 3 pages of Google were these 5 pieces of writing advice. Then I also sent out to some grad school friends of mine who are graduate faculty, and I asked them to just have their students write down the advice they were given. And so a lot of the same bits of advice that I was given in grad school, that you find throughout the internet, that they've been given, popped up, and I use that to populate this list. Because if this is what people are hearing, this is what you need to be prepared to navigate and to think about. Always be writing. And its cousin, write every day. Write what you know. Suffer for your craft. And then a more general prescriptive advice. The You should always, you should never. We're going to talk about each one of these in turn. So I'm not just throwing them out there. Let's talk about always be writing. This was one I heard constantly in grad school. Why do people give this advice? Well, completion requires action. If you don't write your dissertation, you're never going to finish it, right? Or as several professors of mine have said, a good dissertation is a done dissertation. And graduate programs do not offer unlimited time. They want you making progress. So you've got to be writing, keep going. And they give you this, always write. If you've got free time, you've got writing time. It's similar to if you've got time to lean, you've got time to clean advice that you might hear parents or others say. But let's talk about this advice. This advice became popular when graduate schools had lower student to faculty ratios. There weren't that many students in graduate programs when they started offering this advice. Graduate programs also offered you more time to complete your dissertation. Now, they want you to finish your dissertation in a year or two. Why? Because it looks good for their matriculation rates. Higher matriculation rates often translates into increased funding. And so that's kind of an essential thing. But it also became popular when students had the luxury of no other responsibilities, when students were wealthy, when students were single, when you could afford to spend 10 years writing your dissertation and you had nothing else to do other than maybe make sport, travel in the summer abroad, but you didn't have a job, you didn't have a family, you just had student as something to worry about. It's also a problem because it can increase feelings of guilt, anxiety, and depression. It can lead people to feel like they're always behind. Because if I'm not always writing, I'm not behind. I'm behind. I can't keep up. Yes, you can. So let's make the advice meaningful. Something I'm going to say over and over again. Schedule writing times and keep them. And also schedule rest times. You need time to rest and recuperate. Maybe you're working full time, you've got a family. Maybe the only time you have to write your dissertation is Thursday and Saturday night between 7 and 10 p.m. Okay, if those are the only time slots you have, mark those on your calendar as writing times and keep those appointments. Regular, incremental progress often gets you farther faster than random, irregular, binged progress. Maybe during the week you only have time to write between 300 and 500 words per night. That's roughly 2 to 3 pages. Maybe that's all you have time to write. But if you do that 5 days a week, that's between 1,500 and 2,500 words. That's between, 8 to 10, 7 to 10 pages, roughly, each week. of drafted writing, which means you could theoretically draft a chapter that way in 2 to 3 weeks if you have all your planning in place. And that keeps you making progress. Besides, regular progress keeps you motivated. So let's move on to always be writing's cousin. Write every day. Same thing. Completion requires action. And writing is a craft. It's no different than learning a musical instrument, learning a sport, learning to drive, to ride a horse, getting better at the latest Dark Souls game. You have to practice. Continued practice is how you make improvement. And again, that time crunch. Here are some problems. Writing every day doesn't fit into everyone's life. Writing every day ignores the reality of illness, both physical and mental, tiredness, stress, work, family. You know, sometimes you're really sick. I have ADHD and a full-time job. I tend to average 7 to 8 migraine days per month. On a migraine day, on a bad ADHD day, if I had to write after I finish working, nothing's going to happen. But feeling pressured to write every day because my professor said I should be doing that can lead to burnout. It can lead to stress. It can lead to feeling like you're falling behind and will never catch up. Again, schedule writing times. Keep those scheduled times and schedule resting times. Something I have learned in the process is if I write 4 to 5 days a week, you know, on weekdays, I would if I scheduled 300 to 500 words, and then a total of 1,500 words on the weekend. But so I'm writing 4 days, maybe 5 days. It seems like that's counterintuitive. That's less writing time than every day, which means you're writing less. I find that I'm more productive because I've made appointments with myself that I keep, and because I'm getting rest in, I'm able to focus more when I'm writing. And so I get more written in a shorter session simply because I'm taking time to rest. Okay, Susan, and that's what I just said. You don't have to write every day because maybe your situation is where you are doing data analysis. You're not in the place where you're writing, you're in a place where you're doing the analysis so you can write it up later. But again, as I have been saying, you have to take into account your situation. So let's move on. Write what you know. You'll hear this all the time. And the point of this is you want to maintain expertise. We know how much bad stuff's on the internet, how much misinformation's out there. Write what you know. This advice also promotes research, and it's an attempt to prevent misinformation, false information, bad information from being shared. Now, here's the thing. You're in grad school, right? You're probably already doing this because you're doing your research. You've gotten maybe 40, 50, 100 sources for your literature review. You've gone through all of these sources, you know the topic. So you're writing what you know. But it's a pithy little meme that sounds really good on t-shirts. It's a good slogan, but instead of something more nuanced, like research your subject to learn about it before you begin writing. That doesn't that doesn't fit on coffee mugs or memes or t-shirts, as well as write what you know. But that is the gist of it. It's do your research before you start writing. So how do we make it meaningful? Research your background information and organize it. You don't have to have a formal outline. You don't even have to have a bullet point outline, but you need to have some sort of organization for your research, so when you need it, you can find it quickly. And just remember, don't fall into the common graduate student mistake of searching the journals equals making progress. When you're working on your literature review, searching the journals is an essential step. But once you start drafting, searching the journals can easily be a way of, I'm avoiding writing because I just need one more piece of evidence, one more really good source. There's an old webcomic called PhD Comics by physicist Katie Mack. And that's one thing that she often discussed, which is it was so easy to fall into the habit of, no, I'm making progress. I'm still doing research. And what that was just Googling topics in databases, as opposed to sitting down and writing. You can research forever. Some of us would love to be able to just research forever. But to get those credentials out after your name, that comma PhD, you do have to sit down and write. And even if you're in the data analysis phase, you're going to have to finish writing the dissertation eventually. So you may not be writing at present, but you'll have to get back to it to write up your analysis and your results, and to write up the discussion. So you're not finished yet, but you do need to make sure that you're paying attention to how you budget your time. And the one that I hated hearing the most from people, the variance of suffer for the craft, suffer for the art. Writing is art, writing is craft. You have to work at it to develop it. And you may not have heard suffer for your art, but you may have heard, I know you're struggling. We've all been there. It's normal to struggle. Everyone feels this way in grad school. This all stems from this belief that suffering produces greater work. We do our best when we're suffering. The romantic image of the writer alone in a darkened room with candles in a journal. That's not really how it works. Writers talk to each other sometimes. Sometimes we avoid talking to other people. Again, PhD Comics often had when you know you should be writing, and how you will go out of your way to avoid being seen by your chair by taking long, convoluted routes around their office so they don't notice you. But a lot of times this advice is poorly worded way of normalizing struggle. And the problem is it's toxic. If someone is struggling, if someone is suffering, that should never be normalized. And many people myself included, as well as several colleagues have said, hearing this just minimized any, it was trying to, you felt like the people just didn't want to hear about your emotional stress, your psychological stress. Look, writing a dissertation is stressful. It's a lot of work. It's a big passion project. It's a multi-month, multi-year research project. You are pouring time and energy and passion into it. And depending on the topic, if you're dealing with mental health and physical health as part of your dissertation topic, vicarious trauma, vicarious suffering, these are things you might have to deal with. And hearing people say, yeah, it's normal, I just push through it, can make you feel alone. You're not alone if you're stressed and if you're feeling overwhelmed. Most of us do feel that way, and the only way we can move past it is to talk about it openly and honestly with others. A friend of mine who's at Hastings University now as a professor, he has told many students that he was my best friend in grad school, that, we became friends. We were taking a class on Russian narrative theory, and we were paired for a project, and while we were sitting outside looking at it, I just looked at him and said, okay, I'm going to be honest, I'm struggling. Everyone else seems to know what they're talking about. I have no idea what's going on. And I watched his shoulders just relax when he said, really? I thought you were the only one who knew what was going on. And I'm like, no, I have no clue what's going on. But it was that moment of honest connection. Like, look, I don't know what's going on. I'm lost. And having someone to bond with, to help you, to provide that emotional support. We build community so that way we can get through greater trials and greater struggles. So how do we make this advice meaningful? 1, take days off, rest, recharge, reconnect. Reconnect with friends, with family, with your faith if you have it, but most importantly, reconnect with yourself. You are a person beyond a degree. Reconnect with yourself. And, find a friend group, find a support group, find a therapist. Having someone to talk to, especially someone who's trained in dealing with stress, anxiety, fear, burnout, someone to help give you strategies, and someone who can professionally and gently hold you accountable, not just for making progress on your writing, but for making progress on self-care and keeping yourself from falling apart and being demoralized and overwhelmed. These are things that are essential, and we often don't talk about it, especially in the United States. I've learned since spending all of my time here that mental health struggles are not popular topics of conversation. If you ask an American, how are you doing? The response is fine. If you ask a German, how are you doing? They'll give you an honest answer. So consider, and you may not be able to be honest and open with everyone, but a therapist, a trusted friend, someone you can go to for advice and for support, because if we suffer alone, it compounds the stress and the fear of being, quote unquote, the only one suffering. If we suffer together, then we share each other's burdens and it lightens the load and makes it easier to push forward. And then the prescriptive advice, the you should, the always, the never, the you should nevers. This advice is easy to give. You should always be writing. You should write every day. You should never use adverbs. Never use passive voice. Always write in the third person omniscient. It's easy to do. And it's probably advice that was given to this person. Oh, Susan, you're going to hear a lot more advice about self-care. I'm not done with my self-care spiel, because I did not have that advice in grad school, and I'm glad you're hearing the advice on self-care, because I really think that will help more people than we think. But this is the advice where it's, well, it worked for me. And a lot of things, I've told you some things that worked for me. Scheduling only 4 to 5 writing days. That might work for you. It might not. You might have to, yours might be 2 to 3, maybe 3 to 4, maybe 1 to 2. Maybe you only have 1 day to write. So judging what works for you and what doesn't sadly takes time. But you should never, you should always has the air of authority, the thou shalt not. If you forgive my 10 Commandments voice. One thing that I know, it's the be wary of anything where it's always and never. Why? Because very few things actually fit into always and never. One size, whether it be clothing or writing advice, rarely fits everybody. Might not fit your situation, and it might not fit your project. So, consider the source. Everything I've already said, their expertise, their experience, their life situation when that they're giving it from, the advice they're giving you, where you are in your project, what you need. Again, if I say, hey, you should never use adverbs, and you're struggling with comma splices, that advice isn't going to do you any good. So, knowing the type of help you need so you can get the advice you need quickly can help avoid a lot of the struggles. But these are the types of writing advice that that are frequently given to graduate students. And I include things that sound like they're for fiction because MFA writers sometimes have to do both a fiction piece and a thesis. One of my clients is doing a narrative-based dissertation. Instead of a normal dissertation, his results chapter is going to appear in the form of spoken word poetry, which is really cool. But it's also something that a lot of people in the academy don't know how to give advice for, because it's not traditional. But it's super cool to watch as it comes together. So, how do we fit writing advice into our life? Well, one, you do need to know important due dates and the hard deadlines. What are the due dates your chair has given you about getting drafts to them? What are the hard deadlines? If you're going to defend your prospectus, if you're going to defend your dissertation by the end of this semester, when do you have to have your paperwork, your draft, all of these things? What are the hard deadlines? What's the hard deadline to submit to the graduate school for graduation? What's the hard deadline to submit to the IRB? You need to know these deadlines so that you can keep track of of how much time you do need to spend and how much focus you have. Now, you do need to realistically assess your strengths and weaknesses. How familiar are you with the language you're writing in? With this level of academic writing? With the field and what's required of you for the dissertation? And in general, your own writing strengths and weaknesses. What are you good at? What are you bad at? It is extremely rare to be bad at everything. We often don't know our strengths because it's a lot easier to point out mistakes than to praise people for their strengths. And we should be praising each other, and we should learn how to praise ourselves. I know I'm being prescriptive, but it's not a bad thing to say, hey, I know I'm really good with rhetorical and structural writing. I'm not so good with commas and semicolons. It's okay to be able to know that you're good at certain things. Determine the type of writing help you need. I've mentioned this before, but if you just need grammatical assistance, knowing that can help you find someone who can help you quicker, save you time, maybe save you money, maybe save you frustration. Consider all of your other commitments, work, family, your physical and mental health, living situation. All of these things need to be taken into account when you're thinking about how to fit a piece of writing advice into your life. If your job has you working shift work, well, then my advice of scheduling writing times will have to be altered depending on your shifts, right? So you have to then consider how to make the advice work with your life. And then determine the expertise of the source offering that advice. People who have gone through the process can provide some really good advice, but depending on how long ago it was, that advice may be limited by, hey, times have changed. Not everyone is as up to date on all the writing specifics of, where we are with computers and writing and, how new technology impacts plagiarism. We're still figuring all of that out in general. So, we've got to take all of this advice with a grain of salt. And we're running out of time, so I'm going to try to be brief with the tips for best practices. Do remember that. Okay, before we get to that, okay. All right, Teresa, what is the usual amount of time to work on revisions? That's going to the usual amount of time to work on revisions and suggestions made by the chair before resending it. That's going to depend on what the revisions were. how clear the chair's feedback was, and how many revisions there are. Nothing is ever set in stone. Again, I don't know how detailed they were. I don't know what they were. So you're going to have to then figure out and look at it. But you should take the time you need, but you should also make regular progress because, again, those deadlines. And maybe your chair will give you a deadline by which they want to see that you've responded or at least made an effort to respond to their feedback. Talk to your chair about those expectations. But as I was saying, progress is not linear. You'll have good days, you'll have bad days. Don't let the bad days outweigh the good days. And I've said this before, I'm saying it again. Incremental, regular progress often produces better results faster than irregular progress binges. Schedule writing days and times that fit your life. Take time to rest. You are not a machine. If you don't take time to rest, your body will tell you when it needs you to rest, and it will not care if you have a deadline looming. It will tell you, and it will make you rest. Remember that pithy advice? You should be writing. Write every day. Write what you know. Show, don't tell. This advice often has a nugget of nuanced truth that people often assume you understand, but don't state. And again, if I'm giving English language advice or advice from English language authors, if English isn't your native language, you may not share in the assumed understanding. And so that can be frustrating. And remember, even advice offered in good faith can be ignored. You don't have to listen to every suggestion made. Just like with an editor, you don't have to make every change suggested. But you may you may have to then explain why you're not making that suggestion. But feel free to ignore writing advice from most people. Do what works for you. I will leave you with a final piece of writing advice, one that I didn't plan on ever having to give. You're welcome, Susanna. Now here's the final piece of writing advice I'm going to leave you with that I didn't expect to have to give. Do not try to plan two major life events at the same time. So, say, for my instance, don't write your dissertation while planning your wedding. That's something that I would definitely not advise doing. I made that mistake and it was very stressful. So learn from that mistake, one major life event at a time. So that said, thank you for joining us. We are Statistics Solutions. This is a full-service dissertation consulting company providing graduate students and others with timely editorial support for your dissertations and scholarly projects. For information about our services and to receive a free 30-minute consultation that is available between Monday and Friday, 9 to 5 Eastern United States time, you can contact Janine Glace at info@statisticsolutions.com, or you may call 1-877-437-8622. Within 1 week, you should receive a copy of this webinar sent to your email address, audio and the video, so you have all of this information at your disposal. Remember, rest, relax, self-care. That find friends and support. You're not a machine, you're a person beyond your dissertation. That said, it is we're only 3 minutes over, so I will leave you with this. Even if you do not hire us for assistance, we wish you all of the best and all of the luck in your academic, in your professional, and in reaching your personal goals. Have a lovely afternoon from all of us at Statistics Solutions, and remember, you can do this. You can do this. Have a great day.